David from Seattle.
Tim from Boston.
Stephanie from Mobile, Alabama.
Jordan, Seattle.
Laura from Minneapolis.
Terrence, Seattle.
Aquila, I'm from Tampa, but I'm working in Seattle.
Barry from Minneapolis. And I'm Tom from Brooklyn. And Barry's with the shirt.
Go bring the shirts. Good time had by all, right?
Very tasteful. Very good. I'm going to plug myself right here. Very good shirt. Okay, so we're looking at 25 studies. I think when we get to the discussion, we'll just do that around the table and just do the most interesting.
You guys can hear, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
So, the first thing I want to emphasize is that in writing the document, which I'm hoping that everybody's had a chance to read. I know that it's not been out. It was actually written a while ago. It's not an example of good process. It really should have been out to the members like 3 months ago, but it kept getting fiddled with in committee, I guess, is what you might say. And it's been discussed by the executive, it's been discussed a bit by the National Committee, but it's meant to open up a discussion and a dialogue in the organization on these questions. It's not meant to be a final statement of our position. Maybe we will, through this process, come up with a more final position or interim position or whatever. I mean, there's some parts of it I think are basically just flow from our politics in general, but obviously there's the bits that are more controversial. That's what I'm referring to. So again, I'm working on the assumption that everyone has had a chance to look at it, and I, in one sense, I'd rather not go through everything I put into this, but then as I was sitting there preparing, I think it may be worth just summarizing some of the key points. Now, first of all, we recognize, I think, the leadership of SA that when we talk about this question of guns in the U.S., there are, in society, there's a number of very different, contradictory, but, in many ways legitimate perspectives on this. There's obviously a big urban-rural divide on the question of guns. There's the question of hunting culture. There's the folks who want to own a gun because of real and legitimate fears of violence in the areas where they live. But it's also clear from polls, but not just from polls, that most ordinary people in the U.S. want something done about the level of violence that they see in society, which of course is brought home most by these mass killings like Newtown and a whole string of others. And it is a fact that the U.S. accounts for 80% of gun deaths in the 23 richest countries in the world. And we, I think, entirely sympathize with this point of view of wanting to do something to reduce the level of violence in society. Because it does absolutely nothing to further our goals of building the consciousness of the working class towards achieving its task. But in saying that, we don't buy into the liberal argument that gun control is a real solution. And when I say gun control, I'm talking about the proposals that are out there at the moment, like banning assault weapons, reducing the number of rounds and clips, background checks. But I mean, there are others more far-reaching, but those are the ones that that are getting the most airtime. Now, speaking for myself, I am a special education teacher in an area called East New York, in Brooklyn. It's not in, people think of in Manhattan, but it's actually in Brooklyn. It's the poorest part of New York City and the most violent. And my school, middle school, I'm the shop steward of the teachers. My middle school is right across from a housing project. There's gunfire on a regular basis during the day. There's people shot in the middle of the day. Within, like basically 100 yards of the front door. Now, actually, it used to be worse. In the 80s, it was worse. Then, the janitors, when they were cleaning in the evening, stopped turning on the lights when they would go into rooms because snipers would be taking shots at them from the roofs of the project across the street. So, we live in a different reality too. The kids, they live there full time, but I'm talking about the adults as well who work in that building, some of whom live in the community, but most of us don't. But this becomes our reality, and there are serious questions about, that pose then for our safety, how the violence in the community affects the kids, and, and they bring all those issues into the building with them. It goes on and on like this. This is actually an example of where most of the deaths occur. And frankly, the people who get shot in those situations are not on your front page most of the time. I'm not saying they're never on the front page, but, for the most part, folks who are getting killed, some of whom are involved in, antisocial activity themselves, and some of them just happen to be in the way of whatever, like the girl who was shot and killed just the other day in Queens on a bus. She was going from her Sweet 16 party, going home, and just opened up, bullet went through the outside of the bus, dead. So, do we want something done? Yes, we want something done. Now, actually, among the people who work in my building, there are right-wing Republicans, some of whom are my strongest supporters as a shop steward, because they're strong on union issues. I'm sure they're even gun control. There would probably be even a few people in my building who might agree with the idea that the teachers should be armed, as the NRA advocates. But this is a concrete example of the problem that we're trying to discuss. So the document started by looking at the historic Marxist position on the attempts that have occurred to disarm the population, such as in Europe after the revolution of 1848. And why we believe in the right of working people and the oppressed to defend themselves, why we believe the state is not neutral. We talk in the document about the example of Black Panther Party in this respect, and also the Deacons for Defense during the Civil Rights Movement. Now, we do believe that some leftists overstress the question of quote-unquote arming the working class. As a key question, or a key question in the revolutionary transformation of society. I mean, it's one thing to say, people are afraid of the state, which is a totally legitimate fear. So when you look at how totally outgunned people are by the state, you look at the reality of what the state is in this country, really frankly, your assault rifle ain't getting you too far on that front. But if we're talking about transforming society, the key question is the political mobilization of the working class, and then splitting the forces of the state. The violence is brought by the ruling class.
Mm-hmm.
Our program is about defending the working class and all the oppressed against the violence that's brought to us every day by the ruling class, and by the threat of, for example, destroying the planet, which is also a form of violence, and about how we mobilize ourselves peacefully to and prepare for change. Then, of course, there's the question of those, that small minority that will try to resist by every means at their disposal. But if you look at the Russian Revolution itself was a very peaceful affair. There were more people killed in the making of the movie 10 Days That Shook the World by Eisenstein on the 10th anniversary than in the actual seizure of power. But we also point out, or I point out in the document, that the debate on gun control has changed since the 70s. In 1968, there was a bill brought forward which was basically to do with the civil rights movement, and as the ruling class saw it, the threat from revolutionary ideas spreading among black youth and among white youth, and what that could signal. So that's what that bill was about. But since the 70s, since especially you've basically had the end of any serious threat to their power, because there hasn't been. As the labor movement has receded, then the Soviet Union collapsed. That's not what they're worried about. And so now, gun control is based, or the argument about gun society is framed in a different way. And the NRA has played a huge role in that, and the right has played a huge role in that. They've used, the alleged threat to the Second Amendment, right for people to bear arms, as a way, as one of the key issues, along with abortion and a few others, to mobilize their base, and have done so very effectively. They've done so under Obama very effectively. And the NRA today is an organization, I think, the figure I saw most recently, something like 5 million people are in the NRA. It's a true mass organization. It has an utterly reactionary perspective. And 5 million, I think. I might be wrong. We could Google that.
I can.
And one would have to ask. Obviously, one should be clear. The NRA just had a huge convention in Houston, and they were talking to the people who attended the convention, and some of them don't buy into, all the NRA's agenda. We shouldn't assume that just because somebody's in the NRA, that means they're totally reactionary. I'm not saying that. The leadership of the NRA is totally reactionary. There's a core of the NRA very reactionary, and we should be worried about them. But the idea that the state is coming for their weapons is just not based in anything real. But they want that to be believed, so that they can maintain this mobilization and use it to, basically get the Republicans back in the White House, etc. So, I think that this is a key point, because we can't look at the question of gun society in an abstract way. We have to look at the current situation and ask, in what way is the level of gun ownership in the U.S. objectively helping the working class? Because it would have been said in the past, that if the working class is armed, that's like an objectively means a certain form of defense. And it is true, that the state will think more carefully about attacking groups of people they think might be armed. It is true. But how is having 300 million weapons in the U.S. objectively helping the working class at this point? In fact, the level of, gun ownership has been increasing over the whole last 30 years, it would appear. And yet the position of the working class has really objectively been going backwards very steadily. And I think in reality, it gives, among other things, gives the state an excuse, not like they need to maybe, but to arm themselves even more. So, I already made that point. There's no there's no way to outgun them. But I want to stress it again. I don't think the leadership thinks that we should fall into the trap of seeing the gun control measures that have been debated in the media or others that might, be out there as any sort of solution to the actual violence that exists. Not a real solution. It could be a a very partial solution, perhaps. To take only one example, the bulk of the murders in this country, to go back to what I was talking about before, the area where I work, they're not being, they don't involve assault weapons. I mean, there are assault weapons out where I work, but that's not mainly, how people are being killed. Now, I got into some detail in the document about the level of gun violence. And it is important to be clear, the homicide level in the U.S. has gone down significantly since the 70s. But violent crime, a great deal of which involves guns, is still at much higher levels than it was before the 70s. The 70s are really where things changed drastically. But also, the number of, it is striking, the number of people who are treated for gunshot wounds has apparently gone up by half since 2001. Even, though the level of people dying is kind of remain steady, or in some cases gone down, depending what part of the country, I guess. But some of that has to do with the lessons that American medicine has learned from the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. They're just better at patching people up and keeping them alive, even though they've been shot. Mm-hmm. So we have to make these distinctions, because just looking at the homicide level might lead you to think, well, things are getting better. No, they're not really. So, the bottom line is there's a reason why, despite the drop in the homicide level, people don't feel safe. But of course, how safe you are depends a lot on where you live in this country. Even if you live in a particular city, like Chicago, it depends where you live in Chicago. There's a drastic difference depending on the neighborhood you live in and level of poverty, etc., as to level of violence. So it is important for us as socialists to answer the question, why is U.S. society so violent? And the level of gun ownership and availability, I think, does play a role. But so does, I think more importantly, the level of inequality in society, the extremely violent history of this country. All these things ultimately come into it. The subjugation of African Americans, even what was done to Native American people. It's a country that's been built on systematic violence against various groups, including the working class. Far more violent attacks against strikers, maybe not in the recent past, but historically, than occurred in most Western European countries. And then, of course, there's kind of the U.S.'s unique role globally today. And the level of violence it inflicts through drones, for example, on folks in Pakistan and many other countries. So, it's really something to watch these people, wringing their hands. Why is there all this violence? Look at you. Look what you do. You go around blowing people up without, any reference to your own constitution. You have people sitting there, wherever they do this, thousands of miles away from their targets, like they're playing a video game. And then you're wondering, why? Really? So there's then, of course, the question of what our position should be. So I'm just briefly get into that. Again, I think we should reject the NRA hysteria and recognize what their agenda is. But we have to understand that they are playing on legitimate fears in some cases of the state. And again, while rejecting those arguments, such as arming the teachers, which is now being adopted in a few places, by the way. Nevada has passed a law that allows the districts in Nevada to arm the teachers. while rejecting those arguments, we again have to stress the real legitimate reasons why people may want to own a gun, and that we're not opposing that. But what's most important, I think, to stress is what we think could really be done to reduce the level of violence in society, such as, for example, ending the war on drugs. Now, we as an organization have not really discussed out in a full way our position on whether drugs should be criminalized, which is a raising doctrine. I think a lot of comments will support that idea. But let's put this a different way. Even if we don't have a formal position on that right now, we certainly, I think, all agree that non-violent drug offenders should be released, because it's a huge source of violence in society to put people into incarceration, into the prison system, where folks encounter people who are seriously violent and then become, I don't know what the right word I'm looking for here. They're basically like universities of violence. And we know that there's reasons why the U.S. state went to such lengths to incarcerate large sections of the African American youth in the wake of the civil rights movement. But for a whole host of reasons, we have to argue for the dismantling of this, and certainly the release of a significant section of people who are in prison at the moment. We also should argue for taking certain measures against the gun industry, who are making enormous profits out of this. But we should also be talking about things like repealing the Patriot Act and the other measures, police state measures. Not that we live under a police state, but police state measures that have reinforced the violence coming from that direction, which, as I say, is a huge source of the violence ultimately. But also, ultimately, we would say that a massive jobs program, $15 minimum wage, single-payer health care, these are real measures that would change the conditions in the communities where gun violence is most extreme, where you have this toxic combination of despair, and also with a section of antisocial behavior that basically at this point is a total dead end. But also then, we should say we would support the gun control measures that were put forward with some qualifications. Like, for example, in the question of background checks that got raised before you arrived, but we should say, I think, that the problem with the background checks is that if you're saying that anybody's got a felony can't legally own a weapon, then that basically has a racist effect. You look at who's got felony convictions. So there has to be some way that people can have an appeal process so that it's just not automatic, just because you have a felony, therefore you cannot own a weapon. But we would accept the broad idea of background checks as part of it. But here's something I want to stress kind of in conclusion, that we're not going to go and campaign on this question. Nobody in the leadership is proposing that this would become a campaign question. We also have this something called terms of standing three candidates for city council this year, 3 different cities. Our profile has grown, and we expect it to grow significantly in the next year. And as such, as a serious organization, we have to be able to answer a lot of questions. We have to, when the media is trying to put us in the spot, when we start to actually come close to winning something, that's when we'll find out, it'll be less nice than the kind of attention we got from the media in Seattle last year. It'll suddenly take a different turn, and we have to know how to respond. intelligently. And, in a way, everything that I'm saying, you have to be able to put the essence of that in probably a paragraph or two at most. You have to send the right signals in your response. That we are completely on the side of the majority of working people in the U.S. who want something done to stop tragedies like Newtown, happening again and again. With African Americans who actually want the police to do their job, not stop frisking all youth, but who want real policing, but also want real resources for their community that could help prevent kids going down the path towards being in gangs, and et cetera, et cetera. So, while also, not putting ourselves in the liberal camp of saying that gun control is some sort of fundamental solution. It's not an easy path to walk. There's certain contradictions in what we're saying because our position is not, and the state has not changed. But we have to have a concrete way of putting this now that does not cut us off from the best sections of the working class that we are trying to, from either direction, that we are trying to engage in a dialogue with and that we want to win to our ideas. And I think that even if this is not going to be a campaigning position, that if through the process of discussing this out and amending it, and separate from like being put on the spot by the media, to put the position that's in this document, again, however we finally come to define that, let's put some position like this forward on our website and our publications. I think that actually will appeal to a lot of serious people like that. We've gone in and trying to take a serious position, not just pulling something off the shelf because it was said 100 years ago or 30 years ago, but we're actually trying as Marxists to relate our ideas, our program, our fundamental ideas to the reality that exists now.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Well, the proposal is that we go around the table. Mary, do you want to start?
Can I ask something else first? Are you guys getting too hot in the sun? Do you want to move the benches in the shade, or is everyone okay?
I'm good.
Oh, okay.
It's just me though.
Do you want to?
I don't mind moving. Keep in mind.
That's enough. One person's enough.
Right over here. Oh, is it all one of these things?
Yeah.
Yep.
What?
We all listen.
Oh.
Or is it not?
It's two, isn't it?
No, it's two.
Yeah. Grab it and then we can just grab it.
Are we doing both of them?
Yeah. Well, otherwise we'll get the yellow.
All right. Now in this go round, how much can we actually say, Steve? How much?
Oh, pardon me.
I'm never sure what to go around.
Yeah, basically, we want to be back there.
Recording them.
Well, I just hit on a couple of points. So, we'll start off with.
I mean, I think we can have.
I'll come back. I'll do some. Okay, I think we have to have a nuanced position. We should. I mean, we need to separate ourselves from the liberals, but we also need to separate ourselves from the ultras who think we can take on the government with a few arms that we can get our hands on, as armed as they are. The big point, I don't know whether everyone's aware of this. Most of the killings by firearms in this country are actually suicides. So this whole argument that if you have a gun, you can protect yourself, and you're more likely to shoot yourself with it than to shoot anyone else. And they've actually done studies. I mean, it kind of surprised me, but suicide, it seems, is often a quick decision, and you either do it or you don't. And there's a couple of studies on this. So in the Israeli army, they stopped young or soldiers taking their